Well, good morning. I'm Susan Meredith.
I'm Brian Glassford.
Yes, you are. And we have two other people with us this morning. And those of you that have been watching in the past that have seen Ron Wyatt on the show.
I got one of those.
Yes.
But
well,
this is a little
This
comic
is one
book.
of his other. These are not comic books. These are just done in a way that even people like you and I can understand. And this is the story of Genesis and creation. And because there's so many discoveries that Ron and his wife, Mary Nell, have made. And he brought Mary Nell with him today.
And she's nervous.
She is nervous.
So don't give her a hard time.
I will be real easy on her today. I'm real hard on most people, but
That's
today
right. We're going to be easy on her.
On her.
That's
okay.
Right.
This is one of Ron's books, and
I can't see it.
It's called Discovered, Noah's Ark, and for those of you that have seen Ron on the show before or around this area, or on maybe 2020 years ago, Ron discovered what the Turkish government believes is Noah's Ark, and I believe it myself. I've seen enough of his material, and
You're a believer?
That makes me a turkey, I guess. But I am a believer.
Well, we're going to find out a lot of information, so let's get on with the show.
Well, I'll tell you what we're going to get into today.
Sure,
we're
awesome.
going to talk about the pyramid building machines, and a lot of people might not think that that is biblical. But somebody in the Bible built them, and they're going to tell us about that, and also about Sodom and Gomorrah. And right now, there may not be a better thing to get into than Sodom and Gomorrah and why that happened.
Most
ready?
definitely.
Back with our guests, Ron and Mary Nell Wyatt. Good morning, Mr. Ron. How are you?
Good morning, Susan.
It's good to
Good to
see
have
you.
you.
And Mary Nell.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Brian.
Well, you're looking more relaxed now. She's in her element here. We've been getting her to explain some things, and let's talk first maybe about this pyramid building machine. Everybody wonders how they built those. And
how big were the pyramids? I mean, they're huge, aren't they?
Cheops, the largest one out at Giza, is 500 feet
at the base? Tall.
from the base to the top, yes.
That's a ways, and the size of those blocks are various,
Average
obviously.
2 tons, and there's some in the burial chamber itself that are 110 tons. They're pretty impressive boulders there.
My goodness. And we don't tend to think of those people back then. Maybe a lot of people don't tend to think of them as smart as us today because of our technology. What would you say about that?
I would say that's a great misconception.
Really?
I have a feeling that those people could leave us in the dust as far as intellectual abilities are concerned. And one of the things that always surprises me is that people are so anxious to assume that we're much smarter than folks back there. But the Japanese, who in my opinion are the most mechanically minded people around, in 1978 attempted to build a 50-meter pyramid to demonstrate how it was done, and they failed dismally. So if the Japanese can't do it, in my opinion,
Really?
None of the rest of us could.
But somebody back then did,
That's right.
You discovered this machine, this pyramid building apparatus, and how did you do that?
Well, the Bible says that God chooses the simple, and I'm very comfortable with the fact that I'm a simple individual. What has happened down through the years, Susan and Brian, I've simply asked God to help me notice, remember, and be able to share with others in a humble, caring manner everything that'll be useful to help them come to Him in the name and blood of His Son, that they might be saved. Over the years, I've had quite an interest in archaeology. I've read everything that's been published, and also ancient history, which of course has to do with archaeology. So I ran across this statement in the Greek historian's writing, his name's Herodotus, that described how these were built. And then I was reading an archaeological magazine that told about the sunboat that they had found by the pyramid, and that they had found a lot of wooden things in there. Some of them would not fit on the boat. After they got the boat completely finished, they had these things left over. They didn't know what they were used for, so they put them in storage. As it turns out, those were timbers from these pyramid building machines. And then in the hieroglyphics, pardon me, out at Saqqara, they had some bas relief hieroglyphics that showed the working mechanism of this machine. So that's basically how it happened.
Well, Mary Nell, you were showing us something in this book that you've put together, a booklet about the machine, in Herodotus. Now, who was he?
Well, he was a Greek historian. He wrote about 420. Well, he died in 425 B.C. But he went to Egypt, and he went to many different countries and collected their verbal history and wrote it down. And he wrote as far as we know, the only explanation of how they built the pyramids. And it says the method employed was to build it in steps, or as some call them, tiers or terraces. When the base was complete, the blocks for the first tier above it were lifted from ground level by contrivances made of short timbers. On this first tier there was another, which raised the blocks a stage higher, then yet another, which raised them higher still. Each tier or story had its own set of levers, or it may be that they used the same one, which, being easy to carry, they shifted up from stage to stage as soon as its load was dropped into place. So
they really described it. He did that. Now, he was a contemporary of the pharaohs.
Well, when the pyramids were built, it was close to a couple thousand years prior to this. But they still passed down through word of mouth, how these things were done.
The pyramids were built from approximately the 18th century BC until as late as the 10th century BC. They started out very sophisticated around Giza, Saqqara, Memphis, and then people migrated into Egypt. This was a very fertile, nice climate, kind of like our Hawaii and places of that nature. So people from the north were motivated to come in and take this land, conquer it. So they drove the original Egyptians southward back into Nubia. And some of the later pyramids were just poor representations of the pyramid technology. But in the 5th century BC, when Herodotus was there, Memphis, Saqqara, Giza were centers of the worship of these god kings, or the pharaohs. And he talked to these people who were taking care and maintaining these pyramids and their accompanying temples and their methods of offering food and this to the gods. And so he went to 5 different areas and asked 5 different groups of priests, which I'm impressed with. You know, if you ask one person something and get their opinion, that's great. You've got one person's opinion. But he went to all 5 and they all agreed. And so he wrote down a very apt description of how these things work. In fact, that description was so good that we were able to duplicate it.
They would take these big boulders and chisel them, or how would they carve that to make it to start?
They had methods of breaking this stone. They would drill holes with hardened bronze chisels, and they would place these holes in a line along the surface of the material they wanted to break away. Once they got these holes there, they'd make a little trench along the top connecting all these holes, and then they would pound wooden plugs in there, pour water in this trench. The wooden plugs would expand, and then at a point, which of course if you work at this every day, you know when something's done. It's like making an omelet. If you do it all the time, you know when it's time to quit cooking it. But anyway, they would line up a bunch of workmen and they'd get a rhythm going, and then they would strike these simultaneously, and that'd break the large slab off. And then they had stone adzes, which is a device I guess you could say it's similar to a mattock or something that we would use, or a hoe, but it was specialized to chip away the stone. And once they had it dressed with these, then they would rub another stone on it to smooth it perfectly. Quite impressive work.
Now, what is this significance, the biblical significance of the pyramid building machine? I mean, this is not just ancient Egypt history that we need to know, but what is it?
Well, why don't we let Mary Nell answer that? I think she knows
Thanks.
this.
Well, I made a few notes here so I wouldn't forget, because there's always so much discussion about who's who in ancient Egypt. And there was an inscription found down by the second cataract. Now the Nile River in Egypt, it flows backwards, it flows up. And so down at the second cataract, that's one of the places where I don't know how to say all this properly, but if it got blocked, the Nile there wouldn't be much water, and they could have famine and all that year. And so they found this inscription down there, which dated to about the 2nd century BC, and it claims to be a copy of a document of Pharaoh Joseph of the 3rd dynasty. And it is called there's not a title to it, but it tells of 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And it's a very long document, and I didn't bring it because it would take way too long to read it, but it talks about the Pharaoh. It's kind of reversed from the story of Joseph, but it has all the elements in it. 7 years of famine, 7 years of good harvest. And it talks about how he went to Imhotep, his chancellor, and asked him, where is the home of the god of the Nile? Well, the Pharaoh of Joseph asked, who is your God? Who's the God who's going to... it's all, they changed it. The Egyptians were notorious for changing things to their current God. But it also tells about the taxation, how everything was taxed except for the priests. It's perfect, except it's just the names have been changed. And so, anyhow, there's no doubt that Imhotep was Joseph. And Imhotep is most famous for being the builder or the architect of the first pyramid.
And for those people that don't know out there, Joseph was one of the sons of
Jacob.
Jacob.
One of the most significant things in Egyptian history, before Joseph's experience there and the story that's related in the Bible about him and the famine and his dreams and all that, Egypt was a collection of city-states with very little, if any, political affiliation. And when the famine was over and the 7 years, during that 7 years, this Pharaoh Joseph was elevated to the most wealthy individual in the world, because this famine extended up into Canaan. As you know, Jacob had to send his sons down to get food, and so anyway, suddenly this man just had beaucoup gold and everything else, and it appears that he wanted to be immortalized, in stone. A lot of people do that today. They build big buildings and that sort of thing. So anyway, he went to Imhotep, and this, by the way, means the voice or mouth of I am. And the name in the Bible that Pharaoh gave Joseph in the Hebrew, it means the God is and the God speaks. So it's the identical terminology as this Imhotep. So anyway, he was commissioned to build a memorial that would last and perpetuate or immortalize the memory of this Joseph. And Isaiah 19:19, which is an easy text to remember, it says, "There will be an altar in the midst of the land of Egypt in that day to the Lord, and a pillar in the border thereof." Well, this pyramid was built, and it was a beautiful, white, shiny pyramid. But later, people came along, took the veneer off Joseph had used for spacing in the stepped area. Instead of stone, he used mud brick for filler. And exposed to the elements, these mud bricks disintegrated, leaving a step pyramid, which by definition is an altar. Around this step pyramid are 11 massive grain storage pits where the grain was stored during the 7 years of famine. So this edifice brings attention to God, and then the pillar in the border of the land is the one Solomon set up to mark the Red Sea crossing site. So we have found that the prophecy of Isaiah 19:19 has been fulfilled right in our day.
Wow.
So, originally or normally you think of a pyramid as a monument to another god,
That's
not
right.
to Jehovah.
Right.
So what you're saying is actually what you found is that Joseph was the originator of the pyramid and the technology, and that the original pyramid was actually a monument to Jehovah.
Basically, all through the Middle and South America, just all around the world, there are pyramid and ziggurat civilizations. On all of these other ziggurats and pyramids, there are temples to heathen deities or pagan deities. In Egypt, that is not the case. They do not have these shrines to heathen gods on them or in them.
All right,
That's so interesting.
I'll tell you what we're going to do. We want to get into some of the Sodom and Gomorrah thing, and this we know something a little more today about how we built our temples to ourselves and whatever, and that even God allowed the person and the technology himself to have it done. We're going to show how God tore down some of those kingdoms here in the Sodom and Gomorrah thing.
I wanted to make a comment before we just jump to that.
Okay.
I just thought of this. It's so interesting how today in society, in music, in film, in whatever, it seems like those that are non-Christians explore and kind of build or develop or produce something new, and how it seems like a lot of times Christians follow after that and try to emulate it and do like that. But it's interesting how Joseph apparently built this first pyramid, and he was the constructor and had the wisdom and the knowledge from God to
Right.
do that, and then the world followed after him.
Right.
So I think we need to turn that around again.
That's a good point,
Yeah.
Brian. A lot of secular historians, because there are temples to heathen deities scattered throughout the Holy Land and other parts of the world, they say that the Jews patterned their worship after these heathen, but the fact is they did not. The worship of God, His temple, and all of that was the original, and the others patterned themselves after that.
I think that's very important.
Okay, let's just show a minute or so of what this pyramid building machine looked like so these people can get an idea of it. We have a little on film.
Now what's this we're seeing here?
Now-
Is that a...
It's a winch system, winding ropes around a shaft to shorten the rope, thus pulling the lever down and raising the platform that whatever you wish to lift was on.
This is one that you put together to show how it might have looked.
Well, the
Mark.
hieroglyphic shows that this is how it looked. There's holes around the base of the pyramids at the exact intervals for a machine that would lift the
Look at that.
stones that are on the pyramid.
What, there's 4 guys?
That's how the
Okay.
Egyptians were able to park their cars on the roof. Now we have a little more footage on this, but now you're showing timber here, and in that area, we're talking about a lot of sand and stone maybe, but not so much wood.
That's right.
Where did this come from?
Well, the Egyptians, their inscriptions and their tombs and this sort of thing are replete with stories of people going to Lebanon and bringing back cedars of Lebanon. And in their temples and public buildings and all that, there is no wood or no evidence that wood was a part of the structure. So these had to be used for scaffolding and, of course, for these lift devices.
We're going to go ahead and come back because we've got so much to get into today. We should have done this in a 3-hour show, I think. But
Visit arcfiles.net